Hello, Angie. I'm glad that we get to talk about poverty this week, not because it's a happy subject, but because I think, among other things, it perhaps is the biggest predictor of academic achievement gaps in our school system today, even more so than race or ethnicity. But I think those two are very much connected because minorities like blacks and Latinos are disproportionately affected by poverty. So last week, I talked a little bit about the story behind Ferguson and how I was educated on the systemic racist housing policies that took place, which basically segregated white families from minority families and made it difficult for them to obtain affordable housing in nice neighborhoods. And it turns out that it wasn't unique to Ferguson, but that even here in the Great Northwest in Spokane, similar policies were taking place even back into the late 1800s. We can look at the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically made it difficult for them to, or even illegal to own housing. Again, discrimination happened against Japanese immigrants as well as black Americans moving west looking for work, and how Spokane was actually zoned in a way that segregated people basically based on their ethnicity. And you can still see the effects of that today. In fact, I've been in a lot of the neighborhoods that they mentioned where you can see a disproportionate amount of black Americans, for example. I just wasn't aware that it is the way it is because of policies that were put in place long before I was ever born. The other thing that I looked at was the Midnight Mine on the Spokane Indian Reservation, and how it just makes me think about the native population as a whole has been dramatically affected, and they continue to struggle to break that cycle of poverty. And not only are they struggling with poverty, but the health effects of certain things like the uranium mine that took place during World War II, but was basically left there and caused a lot of radiation and health problems for that population. So that was just eye-opening to see how some of the policies and actions of the past, even locally, have contributed to some inequality here in this area. I also read that Poverty and Education, Finding the Way Forward article, which had so much information I couldn't possibly cover it all. But what was really helpful for me was to see or read about the federal programs that have been put in place to try to counter the effects of poverty, such as Head Start, Title I schools, and free and reduced lunches, and how while those are important and do make a difference, that it isn't enough to compensate for the disparities that we see, and how the majority of funding actually comes from the state government. And it was interesting to read about different states and the priority they put on education in terms of the money they put towards it, as well as how locally a lot of the money is collected through tax dollars. And obviously, if you're living in a more affluent community, there's going to be more tax dollars to go towards education. So it's important to think about how we can make education more equitable by allocating those funds more appropriately. I also saw the video by Charles Leadbeater, who basically traveled the world and looked at social entrepreneurs who were doing things dramatically different than perhaps what we might see here in the U.S. And I really liked how he talked about pulling children to school rather than pushing them, and how for a lot of these impoverished communities around the world, technology seemed to be the key. It just opened up their worlds and allowed them to see and experience things from all over the world that they would never be able to without technology. So I thought that was exciting and gave me some ideas about how I can use technology to open up the world for my students, and also to create that pull for them by making it relevant in their lives, something that can be immediately applied to their day-to-day lives. And I liked how he talked about making school less about analytical and hypothetical and more about creating and accomplishing real things through project-based learning. I thought that was really powerful, and that got me excited about things that I could possibly do in the future. I also watched Victor Rios's talk, and about how his teacher, Mrs. Russ, influenced him, basically embraced who he was, his culture, listened to him, and that empowered him and made a difference in his life. And he recommended 3 things: removing deficit labels and those stereotypes of, these people don't value education or that kind of thinking, valuing the stories of your students, and having restorative justice in all of the schools. So that was some good advice. Perhaps what I liked best was what his teacher told him is, when you teach to the heart, the mind will follow. I wouldn't mind putting that on a nice piece of art and posting it up in my classroom, because I believe in that 100%. I think if you can teach to the heart, naturally the mind will follow. So that was really powerful. I found a couple of my own resources, and I was looking for, how do we combat poverty? And I was looking, I guess, for some kind of, silver bullet that might be the answer to solve all of our problems. And there isn't one, but in fact, the answers were kind of surprising. There was no magic formula, but in some studies that I discovered, which I've put on the resources and submitted to you already, some common themes were there, and that was high expectations for all students, rigorous coursework. I talked about collaborating not only within the school, but within the community, and really getting teachers involved as well. And I feel like that's really powerful, and that's something that I hope in time that I will be able to master, is getting parents and the community involved and making it a team effort. And when everybody's invested in children's education, then I know that we will see some great results. A couple other things to add on just real quick is, it was interesting, they talked about school districts that do a good job of aligning curriculum with learning as well as tests did well. So at TPA, I guess, it was a beast, but definitely a good training component for me and all future teachers. I'm out of time, but wow, there's so much to learn, and so many resources. So thank you for providing those resources. I've saved everything, and I will continue to educate myself and look for ways to try to make the most of every day for each and every one of my kids. Thanks.